Welcome back, Hamsternauts. It's me, your friendly neighborhood ham dad, with a few words of what I hope is helpful advice. Unsolicited advice, so feel free to dispense with it if you don't find anything useful. This is concerning the blackouts that have been happening in Texas as a consequence of the tiny percentage of their grid that's supplied by wind turbines not being weatherized. It's something they had the option to do and were warned that they should do but skipped out on. Whereupon the turbines froze as a consequence of freezing rain, locking everything up, and they blamed their situation entirely on the subset of their grid powered by wind, which is minuscule, and on wind power in general and renewables as being inherently unreliable, when, as was pointed out repeatedly, there are wind turbines in Antarctica. In fact, Queen Victoria Station, which is, I think, Australia or New Zealand's station, is completely powered by a combination of wind and solar. It is feasible to do that in a harsh environment. You just have to design for it. That's not what I'm here to talk about, though. I'm here to talk about batteries and other means of preparing for outages, and probably not in the way that you think. After all, it is established I'm something of a fanatic for solid state technologies that don't vibrate or make fumes or make noise, things that are nice and quiet and well behaved, that you just plug things into and push a button and they give you the power you want, like a silent, obedient butler. Which is not true of generators, but I'm going to reverse myself in this video because, like I said, I'm highly biased in favor of those electrical solutions that don't involve liquid hydrocarbons, but sometimes they just can't do the job. For example, I've got this big bruiser over here. It's a Jackery 500 watt hour, and I don't really need to promote these. I thought about making a video promoting these, but these are out of sale everywhere. I mean, out of stock everywhere. So people know these exist. They already had the same idea I did, which is to prepare themselves for blackouts by having large quantity of battery on hand, and that's still a good idea. It's just I don't want people to get the erroneous notion in their head that that's all they need to do, because as wonderful as lithium-ion batteries are, and as many things as they can do that you couldn't do before with nickel metal hydride or lead acid, you cannot heat the air with them. I mean, technically you can. I brought the space heater to demonstrate. You absolutely can run space heaters off of these things. This is not even a very heavy-duty battery pack. The output is only 300 watts, but this is a 250 watt space heater. You can get, fucking hell, you can get batteries that will output up to like 2,000 watts. Generally, it's the inverter is sized to the battery, so the 2,000 watt one by Bluetti is also 2,000 watt hours, so it'll generally run that load on paper for an hour. Not really, though, because of inverter losses. You don't get the full capacity of the battery delivered to the device. But yeah, is it working? Yes, hot air is coming out. Is this smart to do? No, this is incredibly foolish, and I'll tell you why. The amount of power that you need to heat all of the air in the space that you're in, unless you're sitting inside of a small tent or something, is just so enormous compared to what it takes to directly heat your body that it is not worth doing on battery power. You'll use this 250 watt heater will use up this battery in an hour and a half or thereabouts because of inverter losses. It's a little better if you do it by DC, because DC to DC doesn't have the inverter in the way, so you're not converting to AC and then back to DC. That's a very lossy step, but it's still tremendously inefficient because all that air that you're heating is not you. You're heating almost everything you're heating is not your body. You're just heating air that you're going to be in, and you have to heat up that huge volume of air as opposed to just directly applying the heat to what you want to warm up, which is you, which is why I'm also wearing this heated garment. We covered heated clothing in another video. I don't think that's practical for everyone. It's kind of pricey, but it is by far the most efficient solution, even more so than heated blankets. I have two heated blankets. I have one to plug into AC at home, because I'm less concerned with losses. And I have a DC one. The DC ones are a little bit more efficient. AC blankets can be up to 200 watts peak, but generally settle down to around 75 watts long term when in use. DC heated blankets that run off 12 volts are typically around 50 to 55 watts, and that's tremendously less than 250. It'll heat you up faster. It'll keep you warm longer. So this heating the air, no, that's the limit. You can heat air, but should not heat air on battery power. Heated blankets, yes, you can run a 50 watt heated blanket off of this battery on paper for 10 hours, and it almost does that. It does like 8.5. This is enough. I sized it deliberately so it'd be enough to keep me warm overnight, and then I could recharge it the following day with the solar panels that go to this thing. And that's really the big advantage these have over generators, is that if you're in the middle of nowhere, you can't get more fuel, but you can get more sun. And these really do work with the big panels. You have to get big ones. I have said that before. I really mean it. You're not going to have a good experience unless you oversize the panels for the application. The array should be, in a perfect world, 3 times what you need to account for really cloudy conditions, because you're only going to get about a third of the rated output under those conditions. Newer panels are better about that. They're generally optimized for IR, which penetrates cloud cover. So at least try to get twice what you need. And if you do, there's a reasonable guarantee that you will have a good experience with these batteries. And they'll generally recommend how much you need in order to realistically, under real world conditions, fully recharge the battery in a day. And I don't mean like all day. I mean within like 6 to 8 hours of reasonable quality sunlight. And that's where these things really shine, is that they can be solar charged and generators can't. So they're best as a supplement to solar panels, because they refill themselves. You're limited in how much power you can use per day, but you have the whole thing full again, good as new, tomorrow, and the day after that, and the day after that. So you have a budget of energy per day, but it just keeps refilling itself, and it really works. I showed everyone on my channel that these things really do what they're supposed to do, and they really perform as advertised in my lake video, my vacation video, where I tested this thing out and used it for 100% of my power needs for a couple days, just to confirm to my own satisfaction that it performs up to the company standards. I do recommend Jackery. There are slightly cheaper options out there, but they're kind of mystery Chinese options. I don't mean to cast aspersions, but they're not as guaranteed. There are higher end options as well, like Energy Apex, but you're paying substantially more, as many as $500 more than, say, a Jackery 1000 for only slightly more power, like 1200 watt hours or something. Or I don't even know if it's that much. It's like half again as much money for nearly the same capacity. Whereas you can pay as little as $600 or $700 for 1,000 watt hours if you're willing to buy like a Pecron or something, which is another popular one you see people doing reviews of these days. They seem to like it. I watch a lot of car camping channels like Dentan and K cars, which are KEI, which are just micro city cars. K camper channels are getting big right now. If you look for Japanese car camping, there's actually a subset of the car industry for K cars that specifically makes K campers, that packs as much camping stuff as possible into a little car that can be your daily driver, but can also be used to sleep comfortably in. And it's really fascinating as a subculture, and they have a lot of great ideas, and include me into the fact that I can do almost everything on battery power, besides running electric blankets to stay warm, obviously. You can also, it may surprise you to learn, boil water using one of these. These go up to 1,500 to 1,800 watts, which will run off of some batteries, but not mine. This is a 300 watt one. It's perfectly sized for my particular battery. I got the AC one despite the losses, because number one, this isn't going to be run for very long. But these batteries are great at high drain high drain loads that you don't run for super long periods, much more so than even low loads that run for very long periods, because those consume more in the long run. But yeah, you can boil the kinds of quantities of water. You can't boil water for a shower unless you had a much larger battery than this that was sufficient to run like an 1,800 watt immersion heater. But you can run this. You can't run a full size kettle. You can run a travel kettle. Again, if you buy one of these batteries, size it for your appliances. Make sure that it outputs enough wattage. And some of your appliances have a peak wattage that is higher than their, I mean, they all do, almost all do. You need to make sure it covers the peak wattage, not just the sustained wattage while it's running, because otherwise it'll trip the thing and it'll turn off when you first start to use it. That's especially important for refrigerators, which often have very low running watts these days. They're so efficient and well insulated, but very high peak starting watts. So it has to cover both. Jackery 1000 I would love to recommend, but it's 1,000 watts, which is just barely not enough for like full wattage AC appliances, which typically use more than that. I would almost say try to find something that will put out minimum of 1,500 watts, ideally 1,800, because that's the peak wattage of almost anything that plugs into a wall. In which case you can run anything. Can you boil water? Yes. Can you boil water using a full-size AC appliance like a kettle? Yes, for the higher-end batteries. And that's actually a really good application of battery power, which may surprise you to hear. Because again, high drain, short duration, boils in a couple minutes. So you can boil many, many, many kettles of water off of one battery charge. Whereas if you have something that's maybe half the wattage, but you have to leave it on longer, like a electric frying pan, which also can be used off of battery power, then that's a different proposition, especially induction cooktops and things like that. You can do that off of battery power. I've seen people do that. I've seen Dentan do that. If you're cooking something really quickly, that's one thing. If you're like slow cooking something, it's not going to work, because again, even if it's lower wattage, it's just if you multiply it by how long you're cooking, it's going to use way more overall. So quick short loads, giggity, are ideal for this application if you have a battery that has an inverter that's capable of putting out that many watts. For everything other than that, everything other than like electric frying pan, boiling water, heating, lighting especially is fine, because LEDs, obviously laptops, obviously phones. So you should be judicious about what you really need in case of an outage. You want propane, you want natural gas, and that may surprise you coming from me. But if you're going to use hydrocarbons, to channel my inner Hank Hill here, whoa, you should be using propane or isopro or something like that. And the reason for that is it keeps forever. It is probably the most ideal hydrocarbon fuel for preparedness, because unlike hydrogen, which tries to escape from everything you put it in, I mean, if I had a tank this size of hydrogen, I left it sitting, in a couple weeks it'd be totally empty. Hydrogen just burrows through the molecular lattice of anything you try to contain it inside. It was just such a tiny molecule. And gasoline spoils faster than you would think. Even if you treat it with those little pills you drop in there, gasoline spoils in 6 months if you don't treat it, in 2 years if you do. So if you're looking for a generator, if you're in the market for one, get a propane generator. They're different. They're not the same. They're not interchangeable, obviously. There are conversion kits, but it's a huge pain in the ass to switch out all the gaskets. Buy a generator that runs on propane from the start, because then your heating energy is interchangeable with your generator energy, which is just a different compromise than being able to use the same fuel in your heaters and your generators as you do in your car. It's which one you want, which of those two benefits you prefer. I say propane, because if you're going to leave it sitting waiting to be used for an emergency for long periods, it's got to be propane, or you're going to be having to replace your gas at minimum every 2 years, and probably every 6 months, depending on if it's a vacuum isolated tank and if it's got the treatment pellets in there. So that's my take on propane. This is a great way to heat air. It's probably the only effective way to heat air, and it's actually very efficient. It may surprise you to hear me say that. I've said in the past, hydrocarbons are inefficient for cars, but that's because most of the energy gets turned into heat, and only about 15% of the energy in gasoline actually turns into forward motion of the car, or up to 25% in diesel, and up to close to 50% under lab conditions, where they can recapture all the waste heat and put it towards it's like a combined cycle coal plants and stuff like that, which we don't have that technology in cars. So it's profoundly, tremendously, foolishly inefficient to use it to move vehicles, but when you burn it, it's 100% efficient. Technically, it's one of the very few technologies that is. Resistive electrical heating is 100% efficient at the point of use. It's not 100% efficient necessarily, depending on where the energy comes from, how it's produced, and what's lost in the process of transmitting power over the lines to your house. Of course, there are inefficiencies inherent in producing gasoline, propane as well. So I'd have to do a side-by-side calculation, but they're both 100% efficient on the point of use, and it's also why using a gas vehicle in far northern climates is much more defensible than driving one in, say, Arizona, because you're not wasting that heat. It's not waste heat anymore. You're using it to heat your cabin. So the actual efficiency figures for a gasoline truck or something in Alaska wind up effectively being way the fuck better than if you lived in a hot climate, because they create heat no matter what you do. It's just a question of whether you can use the heat or not, or whether you have to drain yet more energy out of the gas through the alternator to run an air conditioner instead. That brings me to electric cars. People have been shit talking electric cars, which are near and dear to my heart, and I kind of can't dispute that very much, except to say that in Texas, the fuel pumps at the gas station were also electric, so they couldn't get fuel either. Some of them had generators, most did not, but when they ran out of gas for the generators, I guess you wouldn't, because you could just pump more gas out of the gas reservoir underneath the station in order to replenish the... That's a good solution if every gas station has a generator. If you don't, then you're stuck in the same situation. If you have solar panels, though, on your house, that's not a problem for you. And you may say, well, the solar panels will be covered with snow. No, not the case necessarily. They run slightly hotter than ambient, like anything electrical, when they're operational and they're hooked up to the house grid. So they melt the snow, not super fast. I mean, that's why Tesla Energy is looking into integrating resistive heating wire, nichrome heating wire, into their solar shingles, much the same technology that's in the glass on some car windshields that can prevent fogging by heating the glass itself. I've got that in the rear windshield thing behind me. So that prevents the accumulation of snow. You might say, oh, well, it won't produce any power in an overcast day. Not true. Not true. Like I said, they're optimized for a particular wavelength of light, infrared, which penetrates cloud cover. That's not the full spectrum of light, obviously. You're missing out on a lot of it. They do experience greatly reduced output, but it's enough to charge your car. You really only need about 600 watts to 1 kilowatt, depending on the model of EV, in order for it to recognize the incoming charge and begin accepting it. It's just a question of how quickly it'll charge. So you absolutely can charge an electric car using solar in a snowstorm, depending on what type of panels you have and how frequently it's snowing. If it snows every couple of hours, or if it snows continuously, you're going to have trouble because it will accumulate faster than the panels can melt it. But it's not as clear cut as it seems. There's people in Texas that just really love their gas trucks. They fear anything new and different. They don't want to take the gamble of relying on something for their safety in uncertain times that they are uncertain of. But there's a lot to be said for a compromise between the two, like a plug-in hybrid. You get the best of both worlds. In situations where you cannot be guaranteed a reliable source of gasoline, you have some amount of battery-only range to drive around with, and presumably if you have solar panels, you have a means to recharge it, if slowly. If you're in a situation where you don't have panels, and the grid is down, so you can't be assured of a reliable supply of electricity, you can run on fuel, and you can stockpile fuel to power your vehicle. You have that flexibility. After all, Charles Darwin said it's not the fastest or the strongest or the smartest that survives, but the most adaptable. So, what does an ideal setup look like? It looks like this car. It's a compromise. You should have a natural gas generator with a very large propane tank. And if you plan to use heaters in your home, make sure to crack a window. Don't worry about losing heat. The amount of heat you lose will be negligible compared to the amount that you trap. It's just important to maintain airflow. Have the generator charge a battery. If you can afford it, the Powerwall is actually a very good deal for what you get, or at least it was until recently. There's been so much demand, being a company that's intended to earn a profit. They've been raising their prices just to make more money, because the sales don't seem to be slowing down. Everybody wants one now because they see the obvious value of having energy security in an era where infrastructure for generating electricity is becoming less and less reliable. So it's about $12,000, like 12,500 or thereabouts, including installation. The actual Powerwall is only like, quote, air quotes, 7,500, I believe. They used to sell a half size one that was 3,500. I think they only sell the $7,500 one now, but that's for 12 point something kilowatt hours. So that's not too shabby. That is quite competitive as battery prices go. But then again, we should expect nothing less from the company that owns the lion's share globally of lithium ion gigafactories. Now, 12 kilowatt hours is still, it's enough that you can heat your house off of it, but it's still not terribly smart to do so. You can run your lights, that's fine. If they're LED bulbs, they'll run for fucking ever off of that amount. That's almost as much as my car. My car has 16 kilowatt hours, and I definitely would boil water using that immersion heater I showed you off of my car power before I would use that suitcase battery. The suitcase battery is mostly for portability if I want to take power away from the car when camping and use it at the site where I'm cooking food or something outside. But boiling water, heating air, doing all these things off of a battery that size is entirely feasible. But if you're smart, what you'll do is you'll just run electric blankets, and you can heat your body directly using and trap that heat more effectively than a blanket, but with heated clothing if you feel like investing. And if you have a pair of batteries, then you can just charge one while you're discharging the other, and they charge in like an hour, and they take like 5 to 8 hours depending on the setting to discharge. So you will always have fresh batteries waiting for you, and that's a total one person heating solution. Like, whatever happens with your house, whatever happens with the weather, even if you were outside, you would remain toasty warm continuously as long as you keep the power coming. And running those off of a suitcase battery, just days and days, it's the most efficient, probably the only way that's efficient enough that you can heat purely off of battery power, that it makes sense to do so as a long-term solution. And I'm defining long-term here as an outage lasting several days, a medium-term outage as one lasting like a day or two, and a short-term outage as lasting maybe a couple hours, just the typical outage. There's not a lot of value in preparing for a super long-term outage. Like, those people who prepare for the end of the world are probably wasting their money, because it's not gonna come probably. If it does, then you don't want to survive it. So going crazy with your prepping, not a lot of value to that. There's a lot of value to preparing for medium-term blackouts, because those are much more those are much more likely to happen. Short-term blackouts happen all the time. Outages rather. So having some kind of solution for that, even if it's just a power bank, is something everybody should do. Preparing for medium-term blackouts, which are likely to become more commonplace in the future. There's a lot of sense in that. It's very economical compared to doing the big-time crazy man prepping. You'll get a lot more value out of your money because you're going to use it a lot more. In which case, I can actually recommend suitcase batteries, because for an outage of like 1 or 2 days, if you get a big battery and use it very intelligently and conservatively, it can last you that entire period. You just have to know you're not going to be having hot showers. You're not going to be heating the air in your living space. You're going to be heating yourself directly with either heated clothes or a heated blanket in bed, or a combination of the two. And it's not going to last you more than 2 days. I hate to say it. That's just where the technology is, and that's not going to change for a while. Until we get solid-state batteries, until we get metal air batteries, at which point the whole equation changes, and we don't need to use liquid hydrocarbon fuels for anything anymore. If we have working metal air batteries that can be recharged more than a couple of times, like the ones they have in the lab now, everything is on the table. Everything. It'll do everything fuel does, because it's close to the same energy density on paper, but the devices which make use of that energy are many times more efficient, except for heating. it's so close as to be functionally identical. We're just not there yet. We don't yet live in that future. So this is coming from like the battery guy. Just know that when I rant about how cool it is to be able to car camp like those, like Denton, like those Japanese car campers, and run a frying pan off of a suitcase battery, and run a coffee maker, make your coffee off of battery power, to run a toaster to make toast, and make your whole breakfast off battery power, and still have most of a full battery left after you're done. As cool as that is, take what I tell you with a pinch of salt when it comes to your own preparations. Realize that in the real world, if you want more than 2 days worth of power and you want to live better than I have described, not having to carefully ration your power usage, you should combine your battery with natural gas heaters and a natural gas generator as a sort of compromise, as a cybernetic hybridization of the two solutions that is sort of more than the sum of its parts. You get the benefit of not having to run the generator constantly. You get the benefit of being able to take the battery inside with you and use it in any room of the house. You get to do almost everything without using fuel, and you only really need to use fuel for the most energy hungry things, like heating water for showers if you have a hot water on demand system for showers that's propane powered, cooking if you want to cook in your oven, and heating air. If you just relegate those super high drain long-term energy sucking applications to propane, that's not the worst thing in the world environmentally. That is not the end of the world, because you're doing as much as you can on battery power, and you're only using the fuel for the things that absolutely have to be done with fuel and cannot be done with battery power, and you're using the cleanest possible fuel to do it, and you're using a fuel that will just sit there for decades and not leak out of the container it's in, and not spoil, and be ready to go the minute you need it, whether you leave it sitting for 1 year or 10 or 20. So for my money, even as the battery guy, even as a solar panel guy, having recounted the benefits of solar panels plus battery setups, that's my recommendation. Don't try to weather blackouts of this type on battery power alone, which I don't think anybody would make that mistake. But I do think everybody has come to basically the same conclusion I've described, being that Texans are buying Jackery batteries in droves. They've been doing gangbusters because of the blackout. So they figured this out already, which is why I debated on whether I should even make this video or not, because everybody knows that that's a useful thing to have. You'd think. I feel like that's changed in the last couple of years. It used to be whenever there are outages, my friends would whine to me to come drive over and give them power banks. I actually brought my ex a power bank. She actually didn't have one. Whenever I used to go downtown with buddies, their smartphones would always die, and I'm like, this happens every day, yet you don't have a power bank. You have not made even the most cursory, cheap, affordable preparations for a thing that happens to you every day. It's just apparently not quite enough of an inconvenience to push you to spend like $40 on a Walmart power bank. But people are doing that now. It's hard not to be aware of that problem, and hard not to be compelled to do something about it when you're without power for a week in a cold snap and you can't even keep your body warm. Just be aware what is possible to do with battery power is not necessarily appropriate in all cases to do with battery power. When you're designing your backup power system, be deliberate about it. Know in advance specifically how you're going to use it. Make a list of everything you plan to run off of your backup power system. Divide those applications into things that are appropriate and sensible to run off of battery power, and then size the battery, and in particular its inverter, to those loads to make sure that it can cover their peak and sustained watts. Then the other half of the list is things that are not appropriate or sensible to run off of battery power, which will run off of the propane generator, or in the case of heating air, propane heaters. And do the same thing for that side of the list that you did for the other one. Know how long you want it to last. Size your propane tank accordingly. Have tanks of the correct size and format for all the different things you want to run off of it, if you want to have little spot heaters around your house and everything. And if you do this, you won't be caught by surprise. You'll have a system that is about as optimal as it can be, that's as flexible as it can be, that doesn't use fuel except when you actually need to do it, which saves you money and economizes the limited amount of fuel you have in the event of a blackout. And you won't get caught in the same situation that unfortunately Texans have. Besides that, when it comes to your car, I love Teslas, but if you can't afford a Tesla, basically nothing else has a battery large enough that it's going to help you in an emergency situation like that. And it voids the warranty of a Tesla anyway if you install a high power, high wattage inverter to run your house off of your Tesla. I think they want to sell you a custom solution for that. It's much easier and does not void your warranty. I don't think so. So anyway, with other electric cars, but very few of them have a battery large enough that that's a sensible thing to do. So if you're not one of those richy rich guys, in which case good for you, you've got a Tesla, your problems are solved. What I would say to you is that the electric car is the car of the future, but the plug-in hybrid is the car of today. And as things stand right now with battery technology the way that it is, and for the foreseeable future until such time as either solid-state batteries or metal air batteries come to market, you're better off in an emergency situation with the flexibility afforded by a plug-in hybrid than just going for enormous battery capacity and assuming that you're going to have so much that it's not going to run out before the outages are over. That's it for this time. Hand that out. Oh, one last note. I know that they say not to mess with Texas. I messed with Texas a little bit in this video. Please don't come after me for it. Or if you do, just warn me first so I have time to spread some Crisco on my inner thigh.